joint EIB-ERW event. We're very happy that we again can work together on covering important economic policy issue and to engage with you, the audience, on a very important issue of the economic recovery. Unfortunately, we still have to do this entirely virtually over the screen. We hope that hopefully in the future we can do this again in person. But first of all, a very welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being here. The title of the joint seminar is Recovery as a Springboard for Change, Germany and the EU. And in many ways, we currently face a double challenge that on the one hand, policymakers need to ask, how can we succeed with the economic and social recovery after the pandemic? Once the pandemic is hopefully over or at least contained, so that a real restart can succeed. So this is the first challenge. The second is that at the same time, it's not just about going back to the status quo ante, but really to think how we have to change our economies, our economic and social structures to manage three huge transformations that are needed for the next 10 years. The ecological transformation to make our economy, our way of life sustainable and protect the climate. Second, to successfully manage the digital transformation, which will affect our working lives and also private lives. And third, to also succeed in the social transformation of our societies. So this double challenge, recovery, massive need for new investment, but at the same time needing to transform the economy and also the underlying economic and social structures. This is a very, very difficult challenge. And this is what we want to highlight and want to focus on in this seminar, in particular on the investment dimension. We're very happy to have Deborah Revoltella, the chief economist at the EIB, present the EIB's investment report. Before that, we were hoping to have the vice president of the EIB, Ambros Fayol, being here. He could not join us, but he has provided a message, which we will shortly play to you. And then after Ambros has provided his message, I will hand over to Deborah, who will then give a short presentation with slides. And then we are very, very happy that we have a moderated panel discussion with Franziska Brandner, the Parliamentary State Secretary in the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. I have to admit, I have to read this off because the name changed and I didn't know the addition in English, Climate Action. That's the first panelist. Then we have Klaus Deutsch, the head of the Department Research, Industrial and Economic Policy at BDI, the German Industry Association, and then Deborah also participating in the panel discussion. We're very happy that Matthias Rumpf, the deputy head of the Berlin office of the OECD, will be the moderator. So this is the plan, and we have at the end also time for Q&A. Matthias Rumpf will talk more about this later on. But if you have anything in the meantime, please use the chat. Please use also this possibility to indicate that you would like to raise a question or make a comment. So without much further ado, again, a very warm welcome to all the panelists and speakers. We're very happy to have such a nice lineup. And now the question to Matthias Rumpf. Shall I first hand over to you and then you will announce Ambros Fayol, or shall we immediately go into the video that is from Ambros?
I think going into, yes, good morning, everybody. Also, a warm welcome from my side. I think going into the video would be the best choice for now. And then maybe you can hand over to Deborah, and then I will take over for the moderation.
All right, I already see Ambros on the screen, so without much further ado.
Unfortunately, I can't hear him.
I can't hear, can hear either. So the question to Christiane Czech and the colleagues, whether you could maybe restart the video. We don't don't hear the voice, and it's a bit interrupted. So let's make another try to see whether this works. All right, so a little bit more patience. If it doesn't work, then my suggestion is, Deborah, that you start with your presentation, and that maybe it's not a welcoming or open remark then by Ambros, but maybe we can see whether we can fix it and then play it later on. Then I would suggest, Deborah, that you start. I hope you can share your slides by yourself, and then again, also very welcome to you, and thank you for joining us, Deborah.
Thank you very much, and I still then 1 minute of Ambroise introduction. Sorry, just to thank you again for hosting again this presentation. We love from the EIB side to have this opportunity of discussing the results of our investment report and survey, which a special focus on Germany, and you always provide through the years the possibility of very insightful discussion. And for us, it's very important because we are the European institution supporting investment in Europe, and really having a good understanding of the investment situation, the investment challenge in different countries is fundamental for our own work. I will start presenting the result of this report, our EIB investment report that we published 1 month ago, and that is also based on a unique survey that we run on an annual basis, interviewing 12,000 firms throughout Europe. Now we do the survey since 6 years, and we really get out of this a good pulse of what's happening to the business sector in different countries at the European level. I hope you can see the slide, and with that I will go to the main points. What we see at the European level is the success of the policy response. The policy response at the European level has really been successful in avoiding the worst from the economic consequences of the pandemic. And actually what we see is that in just 2 years, real GDP and overall investment at the European Union level are back to pre-pandemic level in just 2 years, and that's also happening in Germany. I will detail something on Investment EU, but at the end, what we see is that this very strong capacity of recovery of the economy and of investment, very much based on the very strong policy support. But we conclude saying that this is not over, so it's not a conclusion. It's the positive assessment so far still opens to the challenge ahead. And the challenge ahead are that the post-pandemic world also implies a new normal, and adapting to the new normal requires a focus on investment. And the new normal is also coming together with the digital and green transition, with the pandemic ending up being an accelerator of these 2 macro trends that we were discussing since many years. So a policy focus on investment remains crucial. And we see, again, at the European level, 2 important elements. On the one side, the importance of continuing to protect and facilitate public investment. And here the message is also looking at what happened in the past after a period of fiscal expansion, consolidation comes, and public investment is always the element that gets deprioritized at the fiscal point of view. So a concern on what will happen next to public investment is there, and we come with a strong message to keep a focus on investment. And the second point is the idea of maximizing impact. A lot of resources, and I think at the Recovery and Resilience Facility, but also at the national program put in place in terms of public investment, maximizing impact of these large investment plans is something important that requires not only good design, but also very strong implementation capacity. And implementation capacity also thinking at the spillover effect of various investment programs. That's something where focus and attention has to be kept on. And then the last point, thinking that with the huge investment needs that we have, actually public sector cannot do all. You need the rule of private investment coming in, but then to have more private investment, particularly in topics and thinking at the green transition, you need the rule of the public sector, setting the rule, setting the direction, in creating the possibility for private investment coming in. So our general message on a policy point of view is so far so good in terms of the recovery, the effect of the policy support, but need to keep focus on investment, both maximizing the impact on the public sector investment side, but also creating the condition for private investment to come in. That's the overall message. And then what I will do, I will try to use a few of the results that we have also for Germany, the German economy, and bring some elements, I hope, as a base for the future discussion. Of course, I'm not the, we study Germany, but you are the expert on Germany. So I hope to bring some elements that then will serve for contextualizing how Germany fits in the European framework. So where do we stand on an economic point of view? I think the first graph is very obvious, is the very strong shock in terms of GDP, but also the capacity to recovery of the economy, both at the EU and at the German level. And basically in less than 2 years, we are back to pre-pandemic level. If you add also to the same graph the US, you would of course see US that is back at pre-trend level. So the recovery in Europe is good, but we are back at level, pre-crisis level, and the US back at pre-trend levels. And also, if we look at Germany, two elements. Somehow we had a concern on a slowdown of growth in Germany pre-pandemic, and now we still see the last data actually showing some slowdown again. So at the end, on Germany, this concern of a potential slowdown is still there. When we look at investment, the graph that I show here is only for Germany, but I tell you a bit of narrative of what we see also at the European level. If you imagine a graph with cumulative dynamic over time, European level, and if you exclude some one-off effect in Ireland related to intangible, what you see is basically that investment at the European level is back to pre-pandemic level, excluding Ireland, and you see household governments that are better than pre-pandemic level, and the corporate sector that is getting almost back. In Germany, we have a very similar narrative, and again, you see household government investment that are above pre-pandemic level, and the corporate that is slowly getting there. But again, the message is so far so good. Investment has been resilient, much more than we previously thought. And if now I move showing something that comes from our survey actually of European firms, and here is a part of the story of what I was saying. The first two graphs where you see Europe and Germany are quite interesting because they show in our survey every year we ask firms, what they think if they are investing and their expectation on future investment. And then because the survey is asked every year, we see their expectation, and the year after we can see also what is the realized change for firms. What you see was, it's interesting what happening in 2020. In 2020, so at the beginning of the pandemic, firms were expecting a very strong contraction in investment. They were very much negative on investment plans. It realized as a negative at the European level, but much less than what they expected. And 2021 at the European level, they kind of got the dynamics. If you look at Germany, in 2020, they were extremely negative in terms of investment expectation, but then it realized as a quite good dynamic in terms of corporate investment. And in 2021, we kind of see something different, because we see some more positive expectation and slightly lower realization. But what the message that I wanted to give is that basically the policy support in 2020 was allowing a firm to perform much better than previously expected in terms of investment realization. And that was quite important, because it shielded the dynamics of that we had seen during the global financial crisis, also on the corporate point of view. And the next slide is showing somehow the same picture. We see some negative expectation, but over time getting back quite quickly to more positive dynamics in terms of investment. And somehow Germany being a little bit more dynamic than at the firm level than the EU. That's very much associated to the policy support again. And here in both in the investment report and through our survey, we very much focus on the support received by firms. We basically ask to firms, and we ask to firms all over Europe in the same way. We ask if they receive policy support. It can be any kind of policy support, or whether they received access to guarantee the credit, deferral of payment, or subsidies, or other financial support. And here what you see is quite a high share of firms at the European level, 56% receiving a policy support. You see also very much Germany, it's slightly lower, but it's again, it's around 45% of firms that receive a policy support. We all know that a lot of support was available in terms of guaranteed credits, but the support that the firms that were really taking was most probably going more directly going toward subsidies that actually were the preferred, obviously the preferred source of support for a firm in the country and also at the European level. And then what we do is we try to understand what is the impact of this policy support received by firms. And in the report, what we do here, I just represented it graphically, but in the report we do it more through some econometric analysis. What we look at is so how the policy support was allocated, and what the policy support allowed the firm to do. And the message is actually coming out that we receive is quite positive. At the European level overall, and also in Germany, what we see is that we don't see evidence that the policy support was allocated to firms that were zombie firm ex ante. So we know the financial position of firms, and we see that the policy support is not going more often to firms that before COVID had already financial difficulties. And that's good, and it's actually part of the policy design. In most countries, this was not allowed. In fact, you had to check the financial strength of the firms pre-COVID, and you could not direct the support to zombie firms. But what is interesting is that, in fact, the policy support was going more often to firms that during the pandemic experienced strongest drop in terms of sales. This is good because actually it was a policy support designed to tackle the immediate shock of economic shock on the firms due to COVID. So it was good that it was directed to the firms that had the strongest the drop in terms of sales. More likely if you had a drop in terms of sales. And that's what we see, and it's definitely what we see also at the German level. The data that you see in the first graph really show that it was much more likely for firms with sales loss to receive policy support. The second point is equally interesting because we try to understand once firms receive a policy support, what does this policy support do to the firms? And the nice message that we get is that actually the policy support allowed the firms to preserve their investment plans, so to confirm their investment plans independently of the sales loss. So it's more probable that firms that receive policy support, irrespective of the sales loss, holds to investment plans. And this is particularly true for investment in digitalization. So actually what we see is that this support and subsidies, access to credit, actually throughout Europe was going to the firms most in need and was helping them to continue to invest, to preserve their investment plans, and particularly to transform and start a digitalization. And that's good because it's a sign that the firms were able to react to the crisis, transforming and getting better. So the message is really so far so good. The first part has been definitely doing what it was supposed to do, let the firm alive and give us some incentive for transformation. And this is very much also visible in the German data that are the one that you see in this slide. But then what's next? So if so far so good, can we trust that this is good going forward? And what are the challenges coming up? Here, again, in the survey, we ask firms what do they think about the new normal. So post-COVID, what are the long-term challenges for firms? And here you see that that actually a big chunk of firms, both at EU level, German level, and the US level, actually more than 75%, they think that COVID will have a long-term effect, so will change the status quo for the firm. The first reason for change is related to increased use of digitalization. So firms really believe that digital is the new must-have. So advancement is in digitalization and something that the firms really need to go through. The other elements are innovation, so modifying their service and product. This is something that we associate very much to innovation. And there is also an interesting message related to shortening and diversification of supply chain. Here, both at the European level and at the German level, last year firms were much more feeling the pressure for a complete readaptation of a supply chain. This year, that's much less. So there is a kind of a revision of expectation, not thinking that the supply chain have been more resilient than what previously thought. This is not the case in the US. In the US, there is still feeling that the new normal will require a revision of supply chains. but much less in Germany and at the European level overall. If this is the new normal, what have the firms been doing as an immediate reaction to COVID? And here are a few elements. One is the first point was developing new products or processes. So this innovation approach as a response to COVID. Actually, innovation was important because through the pandemic, you pass through the pandemic, but you have to adapt what is your service and your product to continue to perform. And we see some approach, like some 25% of firms in Germany and the EU, much less than in the US. In the US, you see much more this innovation capacity, but some pick up at the EU level and in Germany. And in Germany, this is interesting because we always ask firms if you have if they introduce innovation in their process. That's a standard question that we have over time and not COVID related. And what you see is that Germany was traditionally below the EU in terms of innovation. The COVID 2020 really marked a pickup, but now we already see some slowdown. So the message that we have is we saw something positive in terms of transformation, more innovation, product process innovation at the firm level. It seems to be already converging. I think this momentum for transformation should stay, and particularly for small and medium enterprises. We also look at a different part of the story, more on digitalization. Again, the pandemic has been a strong accelerator of digitalization at the firm level, also for small and medium enterprises, more for large one, but it has been a driver for acceleration of a digitalization process. What we see is in the first graph, we show the percentage of firms that in our survey tell us that they were becoming more digital as a response to COVID. This assumes more the easy part of digitalization, so starting selling product online, remote working, so the first part of digitalization. And you see that actually German firms were more dynamic in this context. More than 50% were increasing their digitalization, higher than the EU level. Again, it was much more large firms than SME, but we have still more than 40% of SME that started this digitalization. This doesn't mean necessarily that the firms increase the overall advanced application of advanced digital technologies. Actually, what we see is a process that actually seems to be happening also on the innovation side, that focusing on the immediate transformation, the easy part of the work has been done. So you try to sell online product, you try to implement remote working, but that's the first step of a journey, and still you don't transform completely your company. That comes later. But the positive message is that the start of this journey, particularly for an SME, is the most difficult one. So the hope and the expectation is that this initial transformation keep going, and the transformation keeps going forward. And here, another interesting thing is looking at advanced digital technologies. If you look at Germany, you really see the big gap in terms of the use of advanced digital technologies between SME and large firms, with the SME somehow lagging behind. Another interesting element is investment for climate action and energy efficiency. And here, actually, Germany looks very much on the positive side in a European comparison, and particularly on investment in energy efficiency. We have a higher share of firms traditionally that focus on energy efficiency investment compared to the European average. Mostly larger firms, but you see this strong attention on the German point of view of firms investing for energy efficiency. And also what you see is a focus on investing for deal with the climate change. We have a question that basically asks firms if they are investing to deal both with physical risk and transition risk. And what we see at the European level is somehow that the firms put somehow on hold investment for 2021, but they were increasing the expectation for future investment. So the future investment plan were increasing. And we also see that Europe is much more dynamic in this kind of both in investment and in investment plan compared to the US. Germany is more positive than the European level, and actually slightly more positive with a higher share of firms that are already investment and equal number of firms that plan to invest going forward. So on what we have is an image of German firms that actually are looking at the net zero transition and at the physical risk associated to climate change, and are actually acting, are starting to invest in this direction. And another thing that we have, we look at firms and we ask if they actually perceive physical risk, and 60% of firms in Germany and also at the EU level, they actually tell us that they perceive the impact on their business of physical climate risk. And the other part that we ask is whether firms believe that the net zero transition, and so the transition, the regulatory process, the transformation process of the economy that will lead to the net zero economy, whether this will represent a risk or an opportunity for the firm. And here, the German firms tend to be rather aware that there will be a transition. So there is only a small share of firms, smaller than in the US, that don't see an impact, but they mostly see the challenge. There are less firms that somehow see the opportunity related to the net zero transition. So somehow this realization of the potential gains for the transition is still covered by the concern related to this process. We always also ask firms what are the key impediments to investment, and here in Germany, much more, so the top investment is always availability of skilled staff. This is particularly a problem in Germany. I think 90% of firms think that availability of skills is the main impediment to investment, and a big chunk of those firms think this is a major impediment for investment. So it's really one of the top concern at the European, but also at the German level. The second impediment is also coming up quite strongly and is related to energy cost, and we see the scaling up of these constraint, particularly also in Germany, and uncertainty about the future that somehow was calming as an impediment. But we also have interesting, and I think it's quite widespread all over Europe, but still with some divergence in some of the countries, but availability of finance was much less of a concern. But what is interesting is also there are some areas which I find interesting. Access to digital infrastructure is more of a concern. First of all, is a concern for around 60% of firms in Germany. It's not at the top, but is a concern, and is more a concern than at the European level. And this we find something interesting, thinking at the complementarity public-private investment. Actually, one of the things that we try to analyze is how firms react to the pandemic, and firms that were non-digital, what is important, what was a key determinant factor for their investment in digitalization during COVID. So we talk about those firms non-digital at all, and we try to see at their capacity to transform. And we see that actually access to good digital infrastructure in the place where the firms is present, it's a major determinant of the capacity of the firm to transform. It seems obvious, of course, you need to digitalize. If you don't have the network, you will not be able to do it, but it's a good reminder of the fact that infrastructure is extremely important also for firms' transformation capacity, and in this case, for survival and for capacity of the firm to be able to continue to perform with the conditions that we have seen. Another, just a couple of additional points on skills. As again, I was saying, skills is the major issues that impediment for firms throughout Europe, and particularly in Germany. Here, what I'm showing is a share of firms investing in training, and actually in the report we have a very interesting chapter that looks at what happened to training, also to skills and training through the crisis. What we see is actually some decrease in the share of firms investing in training. It may be obvious. On the one side, it may be obvious. A lot of training is also happening in the firms, and in the period of shocks, this was less easy to implement. But on the other side, you think that with the wide use of the Kurzarbeit mechanism that we have seen, tying it to more training could have been a good solution. And I know that Germany is going exactly in the same direction in this moment. And I think this reduction in training, and particularly in small and medium enterprises, is something that we have to consider going forward, also at the European level, how to avoid that this happen, and how to tie more the support policies to more training and retraining. And here, one interesting message of what this shows is different kind of firms in Europe and in Germany, whether they were investing more than the average or less than the average in terms of training. What you see is that the firms that are non-green and non-digital, so don't invest in the green transition and are non-digital, they were training much less than average. Firms that are green and digital, so those that are already at the forefront, they trained much more people. Firms that think that the net zero transition represents a risk, they were investing less in training. Those that see it as an opportunity, more in training. And those that expect more use of digital technology after COVID, more in training. So all of these tell us something. One of the messages that we have is that during the pandemic, the divide among firms has been increasing. So firms that were more advanced in the transformation process, they were moving faster than others. And what you see is also that they were also capable of training more. So one source of concern is what happens to laggard firms and to people working in laggard firms. So the firms that are non-transforming are also training less their employees. So you may end up with both, if you want, firms losing ground and employee attached to those firms losing ground. And the divide may open also in this direction. So this is a source of concern, and I think the idea that we try to pass is really to consider investment in people as investment, training and retraining as one of the key policy intervention going forward. Also to avoid a further widening of the divide, not only across firms, but also across employees of those firms. And then I conclude here. Recovery underway, European level, German level, policy support that has been instrumental. So far, so good in terms of the policy support. So far, we saw what we wanted to see. So firms have been supported to face the immediate shock, but this also allowed some transformation of the firms. And digitalization and innovation increasing, but we have to keep a momentum for this transformation path to continue, unlocking opportunity of the climate transition that also is something important, with the German firms more acting on the net zero transition, but seeing less the opportunities associated to it, and the very strong importance of skills, training, education, going forward as a policy priority. And then getting back to my original message, the importance of preserving public investment, maximizing the impact of public investment, but also thinking at the public sector role in being a catalytic for private investment. So the combination of a public and private investment as a key driver for the transformation of the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for these very insightful and very rich talk. It gives us certainly a lot of food for discussion. I just want to make one short announcement. The video by Ambroise Fayol, we have decided to play it at the end of the session. I think we're still working on the technical side, so I will hope we will have it ready by the end of the session, and we can move now straight away into the discussion, and very pleased that we are joined by Franziska Brandner, the Parliamentary State Secretary in the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Ms. Brandner, we can see you. Very warm welcome to you. And Klaus Deutsch from the Federation of German Industries. Mr. Deutsch, are you also there? You are, well, he's coming. So maybe before we start into the discussion, I would like to give Ms. Brandner and also then Mr. Deutsch the opportunity to respond to your very insightful and very rich presentation. Ms. Brandner, I took away one thing. If you look at sort of the transitional part, looking forward for German business, they are concerned about the risk, but at the same time, they're already the ones which are already taking action, which are already investing. So both directions. What do you make of it, and how is your government supporting companies to see more the opportunities than the risks in this transition? Ms. Brandner, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Rumpf, and thank you for the presentation. It's a pleasure being here with you. You know, I think, as it was just shown, is that the recovery is going well, but you also have to look at sectors. I think it really depends a bit on the sector you look at, and that we have, of course, challenges: global value change, energy prices, the skilled labor you mentioned at the end. I think they are big structural questions that we are trying to address. And to your question in terms of what do we do to incite, I mean, we are putting a lot of emphasis now on working with the industry together to make the transition right. And it's a question of regulation, of financial help, and also of speeding up bureaucracy and bureaucratic processes. So we are working on all three levels. We have this speeding up process, which I think is important for all the, not just for the renewable energy to speed up the process, but also for infrastructure projects, other projects. And I think, this is not just one leverage that we're trying to use when it comes to financing preparation of the contracts for carbon contracts for differences. And then when it comes to regulation, we also try to make it easier when it comes for renewable, for recycling, for having a better use of raw materials, etc. So I think we are quite ambitious on all the different fronts, and we see that our companies are ambitious too. And I think that is what gives me hope to see that we look at the opportunities of new products, new production methods, and also a higher awareness that we need to be more careful with the resources we use, that we have to look at value chains and become more resilient. And I think that this is the framework we're working in. And if you allow me just to comment on the skilled staff point, because you made it at the end, this is really whoever we talk to whenever we go local to see, to meet companies or meet their representatives here. It always comes up. I mean, it's always an issue in Germany. And I think that this is, of course, not just my ministry working on, because immigration, labor is one response to it. The coalition has said that we want to modernize our immigration law, make it easier for people also to come and get a training in Germany. This is one dimension. The other one is to facilitate work and private life, family, which is also not really with my ministry, but that we have decided to work on. And then on retraining and making this easier and working on education, etc. So we are fully aware of this. It is just not completely in the Ministry of Economy, but we're also here coordinating and working on it because we're fully aware that if we get even further into the generation of the baby boomers going into retirement, it will become a bottleneck in Germany, even more so than it is today. So we have seen this problem, Madame Revoltella, and are working on it. And the other, on the energy prices, we're working on it as well and try, let's hope what happens in that we see some de-escalation on Ukraine. Our impression is that this is, of course, part of the story why we do have such high energy, oil, etc., gas prices. And it's also a bit beyond our ministry, but we have to work on it to become more resilient. We cannot go into next winter again with empty gas reserves. So we are very much aware of this and are working on it also to give higher certainty for our companies for the next winter.
Thank you. Maybe just following up on the high energy prices. Am I wrong in assuming that higher energy prices, at least for fossil energy, is part of the transition we are looking at? So do you think that companies should have been prepared better by themselves, taking the right steps to meet this challenge? Or is this maybe sort of a wrong interpretation?
I think the question is why do energy prices raise and in what kind of a process? Because of course, if you want to have it useful for the climate transformation, then you do it in a managed process and you reinvest the funding, etc., and you are prepared. What we're seeing now is that we have very high energy prices, not because we have decided to tax more ecologically, but because we have the aftermath or still the ongoing of the corona pandemic, because we have the Ukrainian crisis, because we have seen that Gazprom has not filled our gas reserves in the fall, in the winter, because we see that we don't get gas via Jamal and via Ukraine. So we are in a situation that is not related to our climate politics. And that makes it more difficult. And I think we in Germany, we have learned the lesson now that we have to look and do it like almost all other European partners in the European Union, that we have to set some regulations when it comes, for example, to the question of gas reserves, etc. We are one of the very few countries that doesn't have this. We're looking at different options, how to do it best. And these are points that are sort of independent of the transformation question. But of course, they are interlinked. And we see that the fossil energy prices are the ones rising. Renewables, as you know, the production goes down, production cost goes down all the time. Yeah, so it still makes it more complicated. And I think we in Germany, we have to look a bit more what our European neighbors have done and maybe also go in that direction.
Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to Klaus Deutsch, I would like to remind the audience that you can also ask your questions in the chat function of WebEx. Now, Mr. Deutsch, over to you. What do you make of this assessment we get from the EIB? Is this sort of also what reflects your perspective or what you get from German companies? And also this question, I mean, this not the dilemma, but the continuum we have. On the one hand, companies seem to be fairly well prepared or taking the right steps into this climate transition. At the same time, German companies seems to be the one who see the highest risks. So tell us more, give us more insights on what the German companies, what they make of it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rumpf, and hello to my two fellow co-speakers. Of course, the EIB annual survey of investment always gives a very detailed assessment of what companies think about the investment situation. And to me, it was not very surprising, because that's consistent with all the other findings we have on these phenomena. And I think maybe I make a few comments on the presentation. One, I think in terms of economic recovery and the rescue operation, if you like, for companies, I agree a lot with what Ms. Rotella has said so far. I think, of course, the recovery in Germany was a bit slower than the EU average, because we are so much oriented towards manufacturing. And so we were hit a bit more in the later phase of the recovery by global supply side constraints, in particular, the lack of availability of semiconductors and other important ingredients into the final production of German companies, which, according to our and similar estimates of the OECD or research institutes, led to output losses in Germany in the range of 5 to 7% in 2021, and probably will do a similar damage in 2022. So I think if that wouldn't have happened, I think the recovery would have been much stronger. Of course, Germany has not been that much affected by supply side constraints due to the pandemic in all those contact intensive services and tourism, as most of our Southern European partners have been. But of course, in the later round, the impact on manufacturing was quite substantial. A second comment, the recovery in output and investment, nevertheless, was pretty strong in Germany. And so we are a bit below the pre-pandemic levels, but in general, it was pretty strong. Now, that's all good. And I think we have seen a lot of specific information on the particular issues around the twin transition. But clearly, looking forward, returning to pre-crisis trends is not sufficient, because what essentially the German government, the previous one, legislated is a very ambitious course for the ecological transition. And that can be translated into a permanent need for hiking private and public investment roughly by 15 to 20% above pre-crisis levels. And in order to get that done, there needs to be both more public investment into infrastructure, more support, more demand-sided measures, more supply-side incentives, and more private investment that essentially does it. And because it's such a broad phenomenon we are talking about, it starts with housing and the energy renovation wave and moves on towards industrial renovation, if you like, with both the dimension of becoming more energy efficient and less carbon intensive, and of course to mobility and all the other sectors. And the important thing to know is that for most of those transitory or investments into the green economy, you need a combination of infrastructure that has to come in place for the electrification of industry, for the use of gas or hydrogen in places where it has not been used, or for the decarbonization of heating in the housing sector. And I think all these private and public investments in infrastructure need to be facilitated very fast and at a grand scale, and it will be a trend break to the past. Of course, banks and financial markets are capable of financing these higher levels of investment, but only if the business case can be established well and fast enough. And I think there the government has the hell of a work to do to get the operational costs of new technologies into positive return territories by, for example, by legislating a framework for carbon contracts for difference, but also for certain product regulations or demand side push factors, both in public procurement as well as in lead markets for green technologies. Now that's a huge task to go forward. Final comment. Digitalization. We know from a number of studies that we have done at BDI, but also many other research institutes, that there's a growing gap in terms of digital performance of companies. The large ones, which are investing heavily into improving their digital capacities, and sort of a broader segment of small and medium-sized companies which have been hesitant or have difficulties. And it's confirmed again by the results of the survey that this is a problem, despite the fact that there are numerous policy attempts of fixing it. There are lots of central government facilities providing help. There are lots of incentive schemes already in play, but it doesn't seem to work well so far. And so I think in many instances, this might be a problem both of management teams not looking closely enough at it, but also of the availability of skilled IT staff. And of course, this shortage is there everywhere, not only in Germany, but it might become a serious problem of turning all these thousands of small and medium-sized companies into digital pioneers who understand their whole value chain and can use it for digital business models much more than before. And I think it's a pan-European problem, but in terms of thinking about what we need to do next, this is clearly an area where we are not there with a good solution right now. And perhaps the coalition agreement hints into the right direction by saying that we need a clever set of investment incentives both into the green and the digital economy by helping those companies not only through the tax system but by outright support to move faster along that because it will be very important to stay competitive and not to turn yourself into a problem case for the region you are in. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, let me turn this back to Deborah Revoltella and also taking it a little bit on the European perspective. Mr. Deut and also Ms. Brandner said, okay, we had this skill shortage, but it's not only a German problem. It is a German problem, no doubts about it, but it's also a problem in most of the other European countries. So what do we make about it? Is it just training, retraining? Is it also migration? And if it's migration, where should it come from? So what would be the European answer to this skill problem which everybody is facing?
I think so. That's clearly a very complex question, and particularly on what to do, because as you say, it's not only a German problem; it's a European problem overall. And I think somehow Germany can benefit in part from some intra-EU migration that has the advantage of moving more toward Germany. So at the overall level, the problem is what to do also, not only in Germany, but also what to do at the European level. And I think there you have to consider probably the migration issues is one of the things, but I think the issue of the education, how to transform the education system, and we all know that they are very much developed at the national level for good reasons, and there is, but thinking how to transform and have a new kind of skills also being taught at the educational level all over Europe is something quite important to start thinking. But the element that I was trying to mention is also the one on the training and the reskill, the training part. I think there is something more that can be done in the sense that training not always is considered as a part of investment by the firms, but is so important both in the digital and the green transition. So at the firm level, the more you can incentivize good training that goes in this direction, I think it's something to be done and to be incentivized as much as possible. But it remains, and that's remains the challenge of what I was saying of the people that remain attached to jobs in firms that are losing ground, that are not transforming themselves. And that's something where I think more policy support is needed. So if there are, if you think about the crisis, firm already non-transforming, they may be the firms that later will have problems. If those firms keep workers but don't teach new skills, don't retrain the people, we will have issues there. And it may be pockets, but it's something where on a policy point of view, you may try to do more. But definitely, I think the important point to underline is really, it's not only a German problem, it's a EU problem. So more coordination and thinking on how to do it also at the European level, I think it's important. It's complicated because as Franziska was saying, it's already complicated because it's not only economic minister, it's economic ministry and education. So even at the country level, you have a lot of coordination to do. And then you end up at the European level, and it's not really a European mandate, but you need a coordination also in that point of view. So it's something where more European action, I think, is needed.
Thank you. Is this, again, I would like to invite all the participants, if you have any questions, please use the chat functions to ask your question, and we will make sure to take it on board. But taking it back to State Secretary Brandner, where do you see sort of the European dimension also in the transition, you know, on the skills side we just discussed, but also in the broader terms? Also, how does it and how does it align with the program, the very ambitious program of your government for the transition?
Yeah, obviously we have a huge package as the Green Deal of regulation. So we're in the process of defining the government's position on many of the very precise regulations that are on the table, Energy Efficiency Directive, but there are many. So this is, of course, part of our policies right now is the Green Deal and the very many different dossiers that we have there. But when it comes to the recovery fund, I think what we have seen so far in the first part of it is that most of it was spent on national projects, which was part of the negotiations, the difficult ones that have led to a shortening of funding for the transnational projects, be it TREN or health or energy. And I think that what we see now is that we will only manage to do the transformation well if we have a trans-European green infrastructure. On energy, H2O, hydrogen, but also when it comes to the digital infrastructure and transport structure for high-speed trains, etc., transport. So the question is, how can we start or kickstart an initiative for infrastructure investments that need to be trans-border and trans-European in order to allow us better at the national level to also achieve our goals. And in 2022, we have the sort of midterm review on the recovery fund. And I think that this should be a rendezvous where we think harder about how we can use then the remaining funds for trans-European green digital infrastructure. And this might be a moment to where our economies are on the recovery, but where we see that the longer term investments we need to do to get out of this pandemic well, and lay the good foundations for digital and climate transformations are coming more into the focus. So this is what we are discussing right now, Mr. Rumpf. It's also in the coalition treaty. So I think that this is part of what is ahead of us. And then we have, of course, the big IPCEIs, the project of common European interest, where we also do invest quite a bit, not just the green transition, but also when it comes to battery, hydrogen, etc., but also making our economy resilient, and making sure that we are part of the next generation of innovations. And for example, also in the health sector, but also in others, cloud, microchips, etc. So in a way, we're very much integrated into the European picture. And maybe we can go even a bit more European in the next phase.
Is this also what you would expect, Mr. Deutsch, that we have a broader European perspective, not only on the recovery, but also on the transition which is ahead of us? I hope the answer is yes.
Yes, well, that's true. We have to be a bit more specific, though. I think in terms of infrastructure, Germany would benefit a lot if it became more European on speed, right? We are very slow in terms of getting new infrastructure being done and getting the investment into those fields. But clearly, there are areas in which rules should work only in the single market. And if you think about decarbonizing energy-intensive industries, I think the best approach would be to have a scheme that's pan-European, is consistent with a single market and doesn't cause 5,000 different types of competition law problems. So if we have one scheme that would be possible to be used by industries across Europe, for the decarbonization of specific sectors, in which it's clear what to do and what's not allowed, then we would have a much easier way of life than 27 attempts of member states to navigate DG Comp. That's one element. I think on cross-border digital or green infrastructure, we have to think hard as well. If you think about the large-scale transformation of industry and transportation, of course, you do need pan-European infrastructure for loading infrastructure for cars and trucks. You do need pan-European infrastructure for the transportation of gas or hydrogen. You need pan-European infrastructures of ports and harbors for getting LNG into Europe, and that's not fully sort of in the books of European legislation already. What we have on the table are in particular elements to improve upon the emission trading scheme and to do carbon pricing in a consistent fashion. That's a necessary element, but not a sufficient one. And we need to think hard how to get these pan-European problems being solved better than we do it right now. One additional element, I think, is not so much a pan-European issue, even though every member state has to cope with that. We will have a number of industries in which a substantial change in both production but also employment will take place over the course of the next years. And there will be a pretty strong need for retraining. Now, Germany is a country that usually does invest in its retraining necessities, mainly by companies, but also by professional schools and all the others. Many other countries in Europe that don't have these sort of institutional setups, but they have the same necessities. And again, I think it would make sense to think about common approaches, what to do about workers that have skills that were used in industries which are not viable any longer, but whose skills are needed in industries that have to emerge pretty fast. Think of hydrogen or gigawatt factories, or new infrastructure types that need to be serviced, and so on. So we will have a pretty substantial number of workers in Europe which will have to be retrained and will have to move and switch activities, which is causing trouble already. Now, again, Germany is a country which usually has labor relations that allow for some negotiated compromises what to do on that. But it's not even in the German coalition agreement as sort of a central plank to deal with. And I think we have to move beyond the thinking about necessities and pathways to the green economy to more practical questions of how do we get there? Which kinds of investments are needed on the capital intensive infrastructure? Which types of investment are needed in industry itself or in services around that, and which types of human capital investments are needed to fix the problem of skilled workers. Now, there's one area, and that's my last comment, which really causes headache, which is the housing stock. Now, you can transform steel production from current fossil structures into gas and hydrogen without running into staffing problems at too grand a scale. But if you want to get really serious about renovating the housing stock, you need thousands of workers. Now, that's true for most of Europe. And so I think the idea that you simply fix this problem by intra-EU migration is a bit naive, because these people will be in high demand everywhere. Now the question is, what do you do about that? Are there sort of labor-saving technologies that allow you to address the renovation of the housing stock and the change of heating systems and all the rest of that in a very efficient way, or are we simply short of people getting it done? And I think there's no clear-cut answer to that. It's only clear that if we want to double or treble the speed of housing renovation, which is necessary to get this sector into a Paris-aligned or EU 2050 consistent scenario, we have a problem.
I think I would like to give Ms. Brandner, I think she has to leave very soon, and we are also almost at the end of the session, to give the possibility to respond very quickly. And then I have one question for the audience, which I would then pose to Mr. Deutsch and Ms. Revotella. Ms. Brandner, please, a quick response.
A very quick response, Mr. Deutsch. I said in my first intervention that we are working on speeding up the procedures and processes in Germany for infrastructure. By the way, not just for infrastructure, but also, building your own solar plant on your own roof is not an infrastructure yet, but it's still taking way too long. So speeding up processes as such is the goal, but also when it comes to infrastructure. So that's definitely a priority. On the training, there's an entire chapter in the coalition training treaty, Mr. Deutsch, on training and training for the Green Deal, for the transformation digital. In German, it's Aufstiegs-BAföG, etc. So there are quite a number of ideas in there, how you make it easier for companies to finance it, for individuals to use it, to benefit from it, to use better frameworks, etc. So I think that, you know, if we get this done, again, it's not mainly in my ministry, it's also in my ministry. It's really a whole government task, but we have you know, a working group specifically on skilled labor and the training for the transition. So I think, you know, we are on it, and of course aware. And I think that we, for example, what I hope that we can start in some states in Germany, the Länder have already started this, is alliances with you know, specific sectors like the Handwerk, for climate protection, you know, to say, you know, to get young people into these jobs, to say, you know, climate, protecting the climate from Monday to Friday, not just on Fridays, but to work on it, to go into these jobs, because we know that we will need them if we want to renovate buildings, you know, build all the solar, the wind, etc. We will need a lot of young people going into these sectors, and to build alliances to, you know, get about it. One is the image, one is to, you know, make it more accessible. But I like that idea of having sort of, you know, a campaign in terms of, you know, work for the climate from Monday to Friday, and go into these jobs. We need them, this is clear, and it won't just be possible to do it via migration. And then you have all the question of the raw materials that you need for the transition. We haven't talked about it today. But there's also a European process going on for this, which I'm very happy that Thierry Breton has launched it, because you know, we really need to look at, if you want to achieve these renewable targets, and for transforming, you know, the chemical sector, steel sector, what do we need? Where are the raw materials located these days? How can we recycle them better? How can we innovate on substitution? What kind of different trade deals do we need, and what kind of raw material use do we have to restart inside the EU? And I think this is an entire process that is also key, that we haven't really spoken about today, but where I think, you know, we have to get much better on recycling. We cannot afford, so far we have, you know, 10% are only recycled. It's nothing. We have to get much better. Because that might become the other bottleneck for the transformation, be it digital or climate, is that we just don't have enough access to raw materials, or the critical raw materials we need. So, you know, we have several bottlenecks, and I think probably the least difficult one will be money. But, you know, all the other ones, money will also be a question, but we need to address really at the same time the other bottlenecks. And I'm quite optimistic that we will get there. And I'm impressed of what our German and European companies are already all inventing, innovating on. And I just hope that we will make sure that innovation stays in Europe, doesn't go to China. We also know that China is heavily working on it to make sure that digital and climate innovation becomes sort of a Chinese and intellectual property there, or, you know, so we also have to make sure it stays in Europe, and that we have the patents for it here, so that we can export a lot in the future, Mr. Deutsch, as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Brandner. I think you have to leave, but maybe the two others, if you could stay for a couple of minutes and get into a topic. Thank you, Ms. Brandner, very much appreciated for your intervention, for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. So the other question I still have on the list, or the one question from the audience I have on the list, I think this is also a very European question, is if you look at the transformation from a European perspective, one question I think that comes to mind is sort of how will this affect the relative position of countries and regions within the Union? Is this going to be a transition from which you know, countries which are already strong, probably including Germany, will benefit, or will this also be something from which regions which are more remote or still lagging behind benefit, or what will be the impact on them? Maybe, I don't know, Mr. Deutsch or Mr. Rotella, who wants to go first? Just feel free to So the question would be, one of the questions, maybe, Mr. Rivoltello, maybe you want to start first. I think this is sort of the European perspective the bank brings in. How do we make sure that the transformation we are looking at will not
penalize some countries rather than others, basically?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think the so what is emerging, what we have seen also in the crisis generated by the pandemic and in exiting the crisis and part of the policy support, I think it calls back the importance of the single market and maximizing the European public goods. And I very much subscribe to the discussion and also what Mr. Deutsch was just saying on the infrastructure point of view, on designing it more at the European level and not only at the national level. And here I come also thinking at part of the initiative, even the Next Generation EU, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, some of the plans that have been developed more at the national level are really looking at the effect of more infrastructure, more investment with a design that is national. Actually, what the Commission was also trying to do was to try to think at the spillover of this. And I think it's quite important in the plans. You see a lot of investment on the infrastructure related to electric cars. But if you don't design it at the European level, what would you have? You could have the perfect system for Germany, and then you come to the border and you don't know where to charge next. So I think at the end, it has to be a European program. And if it's not going to be a European program, it will not deliver the results that we want at the European level. But if it's a European program, well designed, I think it will be more than the sum of the different programs. You will have this extra benefit for all. And I think what we have seen, we have two or three actually, I think a very clear example of the last year. On the one side is really on the net zero transition and the readiness of our energy system at the European level. There are a lot of one-off effect that came in, and actually energy prices, it's a lot of one-off factor affecting what's happening to energy prices. But at the end, it also shows that the system is not ready, doesn't have the sufficient buffers yet to really face the challenge of the net transition that we have now. So we are vulnerable to short-term shocks. And probably because also the design of everything that is the Trans-European Energy Network is still, there is something more to do on the one side, and also to think of the buffers that are more European. And that's one example. I think another example that is equally clear is on logistic and transport. I think at European level, we still don't have the full benefit of the transformation of the logistic and transport sector at the European level. That is possible because of the digital transition. And it didn't happen, but it cannot happen only at the national level. The benefit of having it European-wide is enormous in terms of market development and creation. So again, it's something that some more European focus will actually bring a plus at the European level that then can also be distributed and have effect in all the countries. I hope these two examples make the case. Maybe another example is the one we were discussing before about digitalization infrastructure. I think that's also quite important because, and I noticed, and I was mentioning in my presentation, in Germany, you have a relatively high share of firms compared to the European level that complain for a lack of a good digital infrastructure supporting. And I think it's partly is something that really you can do more and do more in an integrated way in terms of advancing the infrastructure on that point of view. And you will have important benefit also for the firms.
Thank you, Mr. Deutsch.
Maybe a few ideas at the end. I think one has to distinguish clearly between those areas in which there's a clear-cut economic case for pan-European infrastructure or a single market case for integrated value chains on the one hand, and other areas in which it's more a national or even state or a municipal level issue. Think of urban transport. Lots of RRF facilities are used for improving public transport in cities, which is good because it decarbonizes mobility in those places. But it's not really a cross-border and international issue, right? But you have issue areas, for example, developing the hydrogen economy in Europe, creating new ways of coping with energy-intensive industries, in which you anyhow will have or already have integrated value chains across borders. Now, it obviously doesn't make very much sense to have a national German, French, and Portuguese policy on those things that don't work together. The minimum requirement is that you have a coordinated approach. Even you might not have common funding for all of that, but you need a coordinated approach for which, for example, IPCEIs are a useful instrument to get it started and co-financed by several member states if there's no funding available from central sources at the EU budget. But in those areas, I think it's by design a necessity to approach that from a pan-European industrial policy and transformation point of view. I think in many of these new fields of the green economy, as well as in the digital field, you have also the need for either having EU legislation clearing the single market rulebook for everybody, or setting standards at the European level. And I fully appreciate that the Commission has moved forward on developing a stronger approach towards standard setting in Europe on those fields, and to move on towards moving beyond national thinking on these topics. I think in those fields where there's a clear case for working in a pan-European fashion, we should urgently go about that. And I don't see that in all the initiatives that are coming forward from the Commission. There's very good reasoning for those things, even in Commission documents, but there's not always follow-up action in the European institutions, even though you might have very high-level European Council conclusions saying that we should do that. There's actually no policy making, no legislation, and no funding below these high-level ambitions. And maybe we have to learn from things like the CHIPS Act that we have to move step by step, very concretely on getting things done. And finding the funding and getting the legislation in place. And we will need similar exercises in many of the fields of the green transformation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deutsch. Thank you, Mr. Rivotella. Hope we shed some light on the situation the industry came out from COVID, on the challenges ahead, both on the national and the international level. So thank you again to our panelists for the discussion and for the interventions, also for you, the audience, that you have been with us today. And I'll leave the closing remark to Mr. Fayol from the EIB through the video. And I say goodbye from my side. It was a pleasure to moderate this session and hope to see you soon.
I very much regret that it's not possible for me to join, but I'm delighted to see the continuation of the debates on investment at the EIB. This event marks the first time that we present the findings of the EIB investment survey and our annual investment report. I want to thank the DIV, in particular Professor Patscher, for the excellent cooperation, the commitment and contribution to steer an insightful debate on investment in Germany and in the EU, and I hope that we will continue these discussions throughout the year. We at EIB feel that it is a much needed discussion, especially this year. EU economies are moving out of the unprecedented pandemic shock that the pandemic has caused. We are transitioning into a new normal, and we can shape what this newly emerging environment will look like. If we take adequate action now, we can make it a recovery for the better. How Europe, Germany, and its firms are positioning in this new environment obviously depends on investment. The pandemic disrupted economic activity severely and took a heavy toll on firms. While the impact on investment was less than originally feared and public support helped to sustain household income and demand, the remaining uncertainties are there to the recovery, among other things linked to the emergence of new virus waves. Germany, supply chain bottlenecks and capacity shortages also have slowed the recovery over the last months. What is more, the shock has been uneven, with asymmetries across sectors, regions, and firms. There remains risks of social and economic vulnerabilities. To give just one example, the school closures linked to the pandemic have disrupted learning across the EU and also in Germany. What is more, they have exacerbated inequalities and hit already disadvantaged children particularly hard. Let me be clear, this is not just an issue of parents struggling. It's also about the decision to neglect or nurture a key ingredient to thrive in the future, which is human capital. In Germany, we see that the limited availability of people with the right skills, what we call Fachkräftemangel, is already the most frequently reported obstacle to investment. 9 out of 10 firms perceive this as a barrier to investment. This is a new high, but the issue has been prevalent for many years in Germany and in other EU countries. Clearly, it is a structural barrier that needs to be addressed in Germany and across in Europe. And to be able to use the recovery as a springboard for change, create opportunities for people and firms, and provide the basis to thrive in the new normal. Skills will be needed to forge ahead with the digital transformation and the green transition, while ensuring that these challenges are inclusive. Many firms in Germany are increasingly conscious of the pandemic's transformative potential. Majority sees that the future will be more digital, and our EIB analysis shows that about half plan to investment to deal with the impact of climate change. At the same time, we see that there are gaps and that some firms risk falling behind. In Germany, many smaller and medium-sized firms still lag on digitalization and often forgo benefits in terms of productivity and resilience of their operations. In addition, the pandemic laid bare digitalization gaps in public administration, in health and education systems, and also pointed to needs to improve digital infrastructure. I am convinced that the climate transition presents opportunities for German firms. Effective climate protection will require innovation, getting new ideas, market ready, and roll out new technologies quickly. This comes with opportunities for German firms. Yet, at this point, we see that more are concerned about the risks associated with the climate transition. Realizing the climate transition will require mobilizing private and public investment on a large scale over the next years. The policy trajectory and its implementation play a crucial role to strengthen confidence in a greener and more digital economy and help unlocking the benefits of change. At EIB, we stand ready to fully support this process and help realizing the opportunities. We have continued to invest at an unprecedented scale during the pandemic. In 2021, the EIB Group scaled up its activity, providing a record level of 95 billion euros in financing. The main reason for this record level in our lending is our role in Europe's massive response to the pandemic. Almost half of our financing has been to small and medium-sized enterprises hit hard by the pandemic, including, of course, through our subsidiary, the European Investment Fund, for 30 billion euros of the total, also another record. In particular, at EIB, we have taken action to support the green transformation of the EU economies. And to ensure that the climate transition is just, we have also stepped up our lending activity in cohesion regions. Financing for innovation, which will be key to cohesion, recovery, and the green and digital transition, reached a record level. This includes investments to the promotion of skills and training to the more digital world. In Germany, EIB group financing in 2021 reached 5.5 billion euros. The bulk of it was to support innovation, digital, and human capital. This investment is crucial to maintain competitiveness. What is more, our projects in Germany also show how innovation can support the green transition in an inclusive manner, such as through our projects focused on energy efficient and affordable housing. We are also proud that our support for innovation has helped to open up pathways out of the pandemic. Last year, we had approved a 100 million euro loan to BioNTech, the now famous in the world company from Mainz, because they have discovered the first COVID vaccine. In 2021, EIB continued to support vaccine research and production, as well as COVID-19 diagnosis and treatment in Germany and outside. Let me add one word on climate. EIB has continued its transformation into the EU Climate Bank, in line with the EIB Group Climate Bank roadmap that has been approved in November 2020. Fighting the COVID crisis did not distract the EU Bank from its climate action goals. In total, 43% of the total financing went to climate action and environmental sustainability projects. We are on track to reach the 50% target of our action for climate that we have set for 2025. Last year, we also reached two important milestones in our Climate Bank roadmap, approving our adaptation plan and the framework that will help align our counterparts with the climate agreement signed in Paris in 2015. On our climate adaptation plan, we have committed to tripling the share of our total climate financing dedicated to adaptation. And with the counterparts alignment, we have committed to an approach that takes into account the decarbonization plans of clients. It will provide a robust tool to help high-emitting companies adopt and implement decarbonization plans. With counterparty alignment, we encourage companies to decarbonize, and this will accelerate the transition to a world with fewer or no greenhouse gas emissions. Europe can only emerge stronger from this crisis by investing in the economy of the future, that is green and digital, and not in the structures of the past. Being early to invest in new technologies, research and innovation, and taking actions to adapt now is what helps our firms to remain competitive in the longer term and thrive in the post-COVID world. Let me close here. We need a joint effort now so that we will be able to say in 10 years, yes, this time was different indeed. We used it to change for the better. With Next Generation EU, we have a key plan and the instruments in place to emerge from more resilient from the pandemic shock. At EIB, we have demonstrated that creative instruments and complementarity between budgetary support and financial tools can be effective to unlock and catalyze investments. We stand ready to support the digital and the green transformation. It is now time to get to work to make our economies greener, more digital. Let's use the recovery as a springboard for change. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you and goodbye, everyone. Thanks again for joining, and thank you also to Mr. Rumpf for the moderation. Thanks a lot.